Network Simply Connected. My name is Vanessa Cardwell. I'm Marketing Manager here at Network Utilities, and I'll be chairing this morning's broadcast. And I'm joined this morning by Mark Smith, Campus and Branch Sales Manager for the UK and Ireland at Juniper Networks, and Tiho Strabak, Wireless Specialist at Juniper Networks. NetUtils are Juniper elite partners, and we've been partnering with Juniper since 2006. So now I'll just quickly take you through today's agenda. Today's presentation will last about 30 minutes with an opportunity for you to submit questions which we will answer at the end. Please use the question tab on the control panel to submit any questions that you may have. In today's webinar, we will be discussing BYOD and mobile threats. It's already well documented that more and more users are trying to connect their personal devices to your network, and regardless of whether they are staff or third parties, they bring the same problems. They need fast, reliable connectivity, and you need guaranteed and robust security. So today we'll explore Juniper's Simply Connected portfolio of products. Juniper's Simply Connected solution makes it easy for users to bring their own devices and swap between devices, as well as securely access their business applications. I'd like to hand over now to Mark and Tiho, who will explore the challenges the BYO trend brings to organizations in more detail and outline Juniper's Simply Connected portfolio of integrated wired, wireless and security products. We hope you enjoy the presentation, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have at the end.
Thank you, Vanessa. It's Mark from Juniper here. Thanks for the opportunity to start to talk to folks about what Juniper call Simply Connected, or if you like, the answer to consumerization of IT, or bring your own device as it's now popularly known. So what we've seen is, as we all know from statistics, that there's been a massive proliferation in terms of the number of devices that we all use. Certainly if I look to my own PC bag this morning, I've got an iPad, I've got my Lenovo laptop, and I've got my iPhone. If I look to home, I counted them yesterday just out of curiosity. If I've got the kids at home, we've actually got 16 wireless devices in one home. So it's indicative really of a fundamental change in our approach to connectivity and our expectations about access to information, whether that information is of a corporate nature or indeed a personal nature, because we're all now looking at this blended approach across multiple platforms. One of the things that we do see is that there's now a firm crossover between perhaps some of the things that we would have worked as separate items in terms of this is a work laptop with work applications. So if I took myself back to my early days at 3Com, for example, then I would have had a laptop which would have gone into work, plugged into a piece of UTP, and accessed them applications via a VLAN that was delivered to my PC. That was my former experience, and those were always on-net applications. What we're seeing now is a change. I myself chose to bring my own iPad when I started at Juniper, so I was one of their early BYOD candidates, if you like. And alongside that, of course, it means that there are now a suite of applications which I have an expectation of using, which aren't necessarily within the corporate domain or purview, but still require some method of control. It's interesting to note also, of course, if we look on the slide, that we denote connected socialization, because we're seeing this blended approach. Juniper itself has a LinkedIn page, a Twitter feed, a Facebook presence, and the expectation is that we use all of these things as employees and personal individuals throughout our business and working lives. Likewise, the content that I'm now consuming has changed vastly over time, where it's shifted fundamentally from an email primary activity and perhaps SAP type applications on net. I'm now starting to look about the way in which information is delivered to me, or indeed I'm delivering information to users. So that content has changed and also provides a new set of challenges for the network upon which we need to traverse this information. So some of the things that we need to think about is how do I minimize the downtime, because it really is a 24/7 connected world nowadays. Certainly if we think about the Olympics, for example, I was at IBM's offices in South Bank last week. They are actually shutting their office for the next 5 weeks, and everybody is going to start working from home. Likewise, I know that O2 have done the same thing. So we've got a change in attitude about what device I'm going to be using, what location I'm going to be using that device from, and indeed what sort of applications. All of these things now need to be a concern for the IT teams, and we've got to work out how to avoid overburdening the people that have got to do this, and hence the term avoiding first-line overwhelm. Because quite often, if I was speaking to folks, and I happened to be speaking to a university last week, and they were talking about their help desk and saying to me that actually 50% of their time is spent on onboarding students to their network. And with some simple things that they can use out of the Juniper portfolio, they could save half an IT help desk head per year just on something as simplistic as smoothing out the onboarding process. So I referred earlier to users, device, and location and application. That's all about this role-based access and authentication. We've got to recognize that there are different sorts of people that are entering our network. So we've got staff like Theo and I at Juniper. We have contractors coming in who are treated as guests but also require some limited connectivity to internal resource. And then we've got what we used to term the standard guest. However, nowadays we need to be a little more sophisticated about how we treat these guests, because there's no such thing as the vanilla guest who just wants internet access. And actually, because our default expectation is a wireless connectivity, we need to think about what sort of impact a guest may have on our network, and we need to understand how to control them. That all comes into play when we start thinking about the architecture that we're going to need, because obviously it's a lot more than just a wireless access point, and indeed now the coverage and the density, because the wireless has become that pervasive expectation with the delivery of 802.11n network speeds. So we're now delivering 450 megabits on the latest iteration of Juniper Access Point, for example. So there are very few applications that people do not consider running across wireless. Now, we spoke a little bit about remote working and the fact that now that remote working lends itself to an online experience, and certainly this blended collaboration, somewhat like we're doing today. The other things that we're now delivering are global conferencing. So for Juniper, when we have our EMEA all-hands enterprise, that's now done via global video conferencing activity, all of which has to traverse our networking. The other things that we think about, things like virtual desktop, which I see frequently, certainly in higher education, for example, video conferencing that I've spoken about, and we've got to work out the best way to meet the demands that are now being placed not only on the infrastructure, but on the staff and the individuals that come to use that infrastructure. I thought I'd pull up a statistic. I think all of us hear many times about IDC and Gartner and others saying there's an explosion in the number of devices. Well, this particular graph comes out of an existing Juniper Wireless customer who's got 9,500 access points across campus. Now, if you look at the chart, and this is pulled from our Ringmaster wireless management software, we got the customer to pull these figures up for us because they had said they were seeing a remarkable increase in traffic time. Now, what we see here is from the summer of 2010 through to when they came back in the autumn of 2011, there was a six-fold increase in session count. And the reason for that, of course, is because the kids have returned, as my daughter does. When she goes back to Sheffield, she has at least 3 wireless devices, and her expectation is that all of those devices are able to connect and conduct activity at the same time. We've got to be ready to be able to deal with this explosion of device and demanding content. While we're doing that, obviously we have to be very concerned as a corporate about what sort of security risks we're exposing ourselves to it. Because it's not now just a lockdown application that sits on net, it's an application which may not necessarily be under the direct control of the IT team. Certainly it's a blended approach here at Juniper. We have applications on net, we use Salesforce, which is a hosted service, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And now, for instance, most of us at work are using Skype as our primary communication tool because, frankly, we were using that at home and it's the one that we're used to, and it's the one that we choose to continue to use within Juniper. That itself opens us up to the potential of a new type of attack. So it's not necessarily just an attack on an institution, it's an attack on you and I via that mobile device in our hand, whether it be a smartphone, an iPad, or indeed a laptop. So we've got to be able to protect ourselves and ensure that we secure not only the user, but that security is pervasive throughout every element of the network that the information is going to travel across. We've also got to try and think about, how do we provision this? Because if we're going to have a suite of individuals turning up, whether they're guests or employees saying, actually, I prefer to use my iDevice or my Samsung tablet, we need to understand how we provision these and how we let these folks onto the network, and what steps we then take to ensure that they've got a safe experience, and we as a corporate have a protected experience from those devices, those users, and their applications. By the way, of course, it helps us to meet regulatory compliance. Certainly nowadays, if we're going to provide guest access, for example, we have a duty of care to be able to track those users and when they've been on net and where they've been. To do that, we need to start being a bit smarter about what we're looking at in terms of activity. We've got to have the facility to understand what applications people are using and how they're using them, and give ourselves the facility to control access to those applications, depending again on user profile, on location, on application type. So we've got to think about all of these factors when we start thinking about bring your own device, because it's a lot more than simply turning up with an iPad. For us, we believe the answer is to be simply connected. What we're really talking about here is, we don't think, as we used to in the past, that we need a suite of different networks to deliver these different applications. In the past, we had a voice network, we probably had a separate architecture to deliver video, and then yet another architecture for standard corporate IT activity. We believe you can deliver this over one general purpose network, the caveat being that it's designed carefully and it's thinking about the users and the applications that are coming on. So we need to coordinate that security across all elements of our network. In our particular suite of applications and devices, we use something called IFMAP, for example, which allows us to have that commonality of language so that each element, whether it's a switch or a firewall or a wireless AP or a wireless controller, understands that user and understands the policies that are applicable to that user, so that we can apply the same consistency across the network. It also means that we've got to be able to deal with this performance that we talked of. Now, if I think about earlier, I spoke about that large customer with 9,500 APs, you saw a 6-fold increase. We've got to be able to offer that same level of performance and allow us to scale seamlessly. Now, with our systems, we believe that we've achieved that, and indeed I can point to many customers of ours that started life, I can think of a very large health trust that started life with a 40 access point solution, originally to deliver successfully a voice over IP. That same customer 3 years later has 3,600 access points and is now delivering voice over IP, location, patient records, all sorts of different applications. They're pushing that network, that wireless network, and those users' connectivity right down into A&E, into operating theatres. We've got to be able to deal with this. If we're going to do that, we've got to be able to present a highly resilient, always-on, wired-like experience for those users. And there are several things in our portfolio that allow us to do all of those things. So for us, as I say, it's an integrated portfolio. It's a wired-less experience, if you will. So what we say is it's an orchestrated experience, and when I say orchestrated, what I'm talking about is one measure of control across those multiple discipline elements that go to make up a simply connected experience. It's one general purpose network that's able to deal with voice and video and cloud services and remote applications, primarily over wireless media, as we're saying today, and from a user's experience, regardless of location and device, they have the same experience that I described to you when I first started life in this industry 20 years ago, when I plugged into a switched Ethernet port. What I want from me as a user is to feel exactly that same experience in terms of ease of use for my ingress to the network, regardless of device and location, And on the other side, what I want for the IT teams is that I want they themselves to feel that they have the same measure of control without necessarily having what could be a potentially large burden when it comes to trying to deal with the multiple elements that go to make up the user experience. So we're trying to make it feel for the IT teams as if it used to be when we configured a switch and delivered a port with the necessary VLANs to it. That's what Simply Connected is really all about. And what I'll do now is I'll ask Chio to go through a little bit more detail about how we achieve what I'm speaking of. So I'll hand over to you now, Chio.
Thank you, Mark. I like to connect to your part of presentation with this a simple slide which states three things. First of all, a user perception and mobile worker perception today is to connect any device from any location and potentially to be able to access any kind of application. From technical aspect, this actually is it could be a relatively complex task. And I would say two main difficulties here is, number one, sheer number of devices that potentially we need to connect. And secondly, always present concern from IT department is the security. How to achieve all this without compromising on security. So let's define and perhaps classify all the devices, not from point of view of branding and let's just classify it from point of view of how these devices are used by the users. I would say this classification is nothing new. It is just a slight modification of something that we have been seeing for many years. So first of all, devices can be classified as a corporate-owned devices, and again, the old classification is including guest devices too. So what is new here is that we are going to introduce and kind of enhance this classification with the new type of devices, which are devices that everybody is talking about these days, which are classified as bring your own devices.
That's a good point here. I think too often we get caught up in thinking that BYOD is simply that. It's Mark turning up with an iPad saying, please connect me. Here at Juniper, we actually think it's actually more involved and more complex than that, and this is why we split these fields out.
Exactly. So once when we classify the devices, I think it is good to attribute a requirement, and you will find that requirements are, interestingly enough, some of the requirements are actually the same for all three groups of devices and three types of access, and some of them are specific. So, for example, really very highly on the agenda here is self-provisioning. So whatever kind of device you are likely to use in any kind of scenario, it is very important for the provisioning of access to be very simple and straightforward. Whereas if you analyze some other requests further down the line, you will find perhaps that maybe where the classification differs is that maybe for corporate-owned devices, you're more interested in device security, in application management, and so on, whereas perhaps in guest type of devices, this is less of an issue. So, as an example of use mobility, I think the interesting aspect on this slide is to see that maybe even the same device, like for example iPad, can be classified in all three groups. So for example, same iPad can be used by a visitor at a museum or an enterprise. At the same time, this also iPad can be used by a doctor or hotel employee. And at the same time, this iPad can be a corporate ownership and can be issued by a corporate to be used for specific tasks and access to specific applications. So let's see how, from technical aspect, Juniper addresses those three types of devices, three groups, and how potentially we can address the access in different ways. So the first let's analyze guest user on a corporate network. And as you can see, the iPad is going through animation of providing a mobile phone number, onboarding, connecting, browsing Google for YouTube, and YouTube actually is available. However, when you try perhaps more demanding, bandwidth demanding application like a streaming, access is denied. So in a single example, we can see easy provisioning by providing a mobile number of a guest, and at the same time application restriction with, I would say, quite a good granularity, because in these cases we are allowing user to access an application, like in this case it's YouTube, but not necessarily all aspects of this application.
I mean, the key here is, of course, that that's become a clientless experience. So what we're responding to is quite a lot of our customers are saying we don't really want to even burden the front of house or the reception team with provisioning guest access. Is there a way of automating that process? And as you saw in that slide that we just had, we've managed to do that so that the client takes care of it. And by providing that mobile number, of course, it also means that I've got the facility to track who's on my network, which helps me to meet that regulatory compliance when providing public internet access.
Sure. So let's follow through now through the steps of onboarding. And we can see that to start with, this is an unknown device, and it will connect to an open captive portal SSID. The actual user session will be captured and redirected to a Juniper application, which is a guest access software called SmartPass. A SmartPass will provide the user with the possibility to enter user ID, the mobile phone number, which then is going to generate temporary user ID and password. This will be by a cloud service called Clickatel, be delivered to a user device, in this case a mobile phone. Now user is ready, and it's got the temporary credentials. It is going to input the credentials on the web portal page, and this is how the user is easily onboarded without, I would say, automatically, without intervention from an in-house staff.
One of the other interesting points here is that one of our customers is also using, well, we've told them to use the QR code. So when he enters reception, they simply scan with their mobile device, and they receive their username and password that way.
So the second part, once when the user is onboarded, let's see how the actual application restriction takes place. So once when the device is authenticated, what the next stage is that the SmartPass, the same guest provisioning software, is going to communicate internally to other parts of the Juniper system via industry standard IFMAP. What is the user IP information? Now, this will be sufficient for a Juniper system. In this case, is a radius type of application called UAC. To first of all enforce a policy and communicate the user information to other part of Juniper system. In this case, the critical part here is the communication of the user's IP address to the firewall. In this case, is Juniper SRX firewall, and firewall basically will enforce a policy that was previously defined on UAC. In this case, for two aspects of enforcement. One is potentially for some kind of server access internally, and also the part that we have seen on the slide, which actually is allowing users to connect to internet and to YouTube, but not to a specific part of YouTube application, which in this case is streaming. The second example again shows similarly self-provisioning and onboarding. So this is a hospital environment where a member of staff is able to connect access medical records at the point when the staff tries to use a non-hospital type of application like a Facebook private application, access is denied. So it's a good example where employees use their own device to simply access secure network, and at the same time IT can limit use only to business critical functions.
And I think the real key here, Theo, is the fact that IT at this point haven't been overburdened with having to provision all the necessary certificates on these devices and talk users through how to do that. We've automated that process. So again, it's a clientless experience.
Correct. From technical aspect, I think it is important to address that the application level firewall is an important part of this solution. And the application firewall in this case is involved in an application flow processing, protection, and at the same time enforcement of certain type of policies on application level. So to follow through the story of being able to control anytime, any device from anywhere, we will go through 4 stages. First of all, to identify a user, device, and potentially a role. We will then onboard the user, bearing in mind differences in onboarding being the corporate, personal device, also from point of view of location, on campus, off-site, from home, and so on. We will then secure and make sure that the session and access is secure with 24/7 protection, again, anywhere, irrespective from where device is accessing the network. And finally, we are able to manage, and management in this case is device-specific, and it ensures adherence to policy.
We've now started doing things like device profiling, recognizing for certain customers when a specific device enters the network and acting accordingly when that happens.
Correct. I mean, in this case, the actual device profiling is the key because depending on type of device, different policies potentially could be enforced and required. So the third example is example of a corporate device accessing a corporate network. So this is perhaps we can say a corporate issued iPad. Example illustrates a doctor trying to connect actually, and it's connecting to the hospital network remotely. This type of application and this type of access actually is controlled with the Junos Pulse Mobile Security Suite, which is a Juniper software and a set of software and hardware functionality, which also relies on Junos Pulse, which is a piece of software that resides on a mobile device. So following through the actual access, remote access in this case is the Junos Pulse actually, the client will allow a user to connect, in this case remotely, at the same time will enable, in this case, because this is a remote access, is going to enable SSL VPN. At the time of connection and this remote onboarding, the access and the highest level of security will be applied with automatic scan for latest virus signatures, perhaps if the device is jailbroken, and so on. So these really are 3 main scenarios which allow, as we mentioned earlier, access to any device from anywhere and from any user and any location.
So again, too, I think if we split it out, user, device, location, and application, these are all the things that you really need to think about when we start talking about the subject of bring your own device or the consumerization of IT. And hopefully what you've seen is we at Juniper feel that it's more than simply somebody turning up with an iPad saying, I want to connect to email. It's how do we deal with the corporate user, how do we deal with the individual that turns up with the iPad, and how do we deal with the impact of guests and the applications that all of these users want to use, and how do we remediate those devices on an as and when necessary basis. Now, we believe here at Juniper that we can deliver that across one general purpose network and give you a single point of control for that user. So I really only want to set up TO the user from one place and know that the policies applicable to THO will come into force regardless of location and device that he turns up with. So hopefully that's given everybody here a picture, albeit a 33-minute picture, so just over time. Apologies for that, Vanessa. But we wanted to just give you a snapshot of the way we feel it's going and the way we're tackling the issues here at Juniper Networks.
That's great. So thank you very much, Mark and Tiho, for that really informative presentation. It's clearly outlined the Juniper Simply Connected portfolio of products for us, so thank you very much for that. We'd like to now open it up to the attendees to submit any questions they may have. If you could please use the question box on the control panel and pop any questions you may have for Mark and Theo in there, and we'll take a couple of minutes to answer those before we finish off for today. So we're just waiting to see if any questions come through now. Okay, so we've got one coming in here for you both. That's probably one for you, Mark, I think. Do I just have to have Juniper product on my network for the Simply Connected solution to work, or can I overlay these solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Vanessa. It's one that naturally people are going to ask, and am I going to lock you into an end-to-end Juniper solution? Of course, as a Juniper sales guy, my natural response would be, yes, I am. However, we don't have to do that. So, for example, already a big investment in some of the things we've been talking about would be that switched infrastructure. To be perfectly honest about it, it would not have to be a Juniper switched infrastructure. Likewise, if I wanted to deliver BYOD and I wanted to deliver that clientless guest access, then we could do that using Juniper wireless controllers, access points, and the SmartPass software. So no, you don't have to have every element. You can overlay pieces of it. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that, Mark. And I think we've just got time for one more of the questions that's come through here. And I think, Tiho, you've gone through this already in some detail in the presentation, but just as a reminder for this attendee, can you explain what happens when a user with an untrusted device tries to access the network?
Yes. Well, there's a couple of important aspects here to consider. First one is the actual security aspect and the protection of the network. So basically the access will be denied. But what is equally important is that this form of access, the access which is unauthorized, should be recorded and potentially later on stored for auditing and so on. So it is important to classify what kind of access is this, where it occurred, and at the same time, if, for example, this access is also adversely affecting performance, let's say, of the network. So if somebody is continually trying to access a network illegally and at the same time perhaps affecting the bandwidth for the rest of the users in case if the user is wireless, then there should be certain measures that also could be available to the system, like, for example, running countermeasures and protecting the users to waste unnecessary bandwidth, shared bandwidth for the rest of the wireless users.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Tiho. I think that's probably all we've got time for today. A big thank you to you both for your presentation, and thanks everyone for attending today. We hope you found it useful. We will make a recording of today's webinar available on our website shortly, so keep an eye out for that. And if you'd like to speak to anyone in the NetUtils team about the Juniper Simply Connected portfolio of products, then please contact us on the numbers you see there, telephone 0208-783-3800 and sales@netutils.com. I'd also like to point in the direction of our new blog, where our technical experts will regularly post news and views on everything from BYOD and mobile security, so it's worth taking a look on there if you can. So again, thank you very much to everyone, and we hope to see you soon. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.